Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be looking at one of the most famous historical figures of all time, Alexander the Great. Was he a great conqueror and leader of men, seeking to unite East and West under one banner, or a tyrant who slaughtered thousands and died a megalomaniac? Find out in today's episode of People of Note. Born in Pella, Macedon in 356 BC, Alexander III was the son of King Philip II and his fourth wife Olympias. Alexander was raised in the typical style of Macedonian nobles and, from a young age, was taught to read, write, fight, hunt, and play music. An early sign that Alexander was destined for greatness came at the age of 10, when a trader from Thessaly attempted to sell Alexander's father a horse. The horse refused to be mounted, and Philip quickly turned it away. Alexander realised that the horse was afraid of its shadow, and managed to calm and mount it by turning it away from the sun. Impressed by his son's ability of courage and quick thinking, Philip bought the horse for his son, saying, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you." Alexander named the horse Bucephalus, meaning ox head, on account of the horse's size. Bucephalus carried Alexander as far as India and died of natural causes at the impressive age of 30. When Alexander was 13, King Philip hired the Greek philosopher and scientist Aristotle, who taught the young prince and his peers at a boarding school. Alexander's schoolmates included boys such as Ptolemy and Cassander, who would go on to become Alexander's future generals and advisors. Here Alexander and his peers were taught medicine, philosophy, morals, religion, logic, and art. During this time Alexander met another young noble named Hephaestion, who became Alexander's dearest friend and possible lover. Alexander's tutelage ended, and, when Philip waged war in far-off lands, Alexander remained in Macedon as regent. During this time the Thracians revolted against Macedon, and Alexander quickly responded by driving the Thracians from their lands and replacing them with Greeks in a new city he founded and named after himself, Alexandropolis. He was just 16 years old. Alexander was then entrusted with command of his own army, and together father and son defeated much of Greece, including Athens, Thebes, and Thessaly. It's said that during one battle Alexander personally saved his father's life. When they came to Sparta, Philip sent a message stating, "If I invade Laconia, you will be destroyed, never to rise again." The Spartans sent back a one-worded message, "if." Neither Philip nor Alexander ever attempted to take Sparta. With Greece secured, Philip then began plans to conquer the mighty Persian Empire. Tension between Philip and Alexander arose when Philip married a Macedonian noblewoman named Cleopatra, not the Egyptian queen. Given that Alexander was only half Macedonian, a son produced by his father and Cleopatra would have been a threat to Alexander's claim to the throne. During the wedding feast, Cleopatra's father Attalus insulted Alexander and his mother and prayed his daughter would have a so-called true heir. Alexander reportedly threw his cup at Attalus and called him a villain. Furious at his son's actions, Philip went for his son but drunkenly fell. Alexander responded, "See there, the man who makes preparations to pass out of Europe into Asia, overturned in passing from one seat to another." Alexander fled with his mother, leaving her with her brother in Epirus before heading on to Illyria. Alexander's exile lasted 6 months before he and his father reconciled. In the summer of 336 BC, King Philip was assassinated at a wedding by one of his bodyguards. Moments after Philip's death, Alexander was proclaimed king by the nobles present. It's been speculated that Alexander may have been involved in his father's death, but there's no evidence to support it. It's also thought that the assassination could, perhaps more likely, have been planned by Alexander's mother, Olympias. Either way, Alexander was king at the age of 20. He began his reign by having several rivals executed in order to cement his role as king, including Attalus. Despite this, Alexander was furious when he discovered his mother had had Philip's other wife, Cleopatra, and her daughter burned alive. The death of Philip prompted rebellion from states such as Thebes and Athens. Alexander immediately assembled his army and quickly put down the uprisings. As a warning to other states and as punishments for the numerous revolts, Alexander razed Thebes to the ground. This in turn cowed Athens and saw Greece finally at peace. Alexander was now able to turn his gaze towards Asia. Alexander steadily began to sweep across Anatolia, commonly called Asia Minor, where he defeated the Persian king Darius III for the first time at the Battle of Issus. Darius fled the battle in order to regroup and left behind his mother, wife, and 2 daughters to Alexander, who treated them very well and became lifelong friends with Darius's mother, Sisygambis, who eventually considered Alexander her son. Moving into Egypt, Alexander was forced to engage in a difficult siege at Gaza, which saw him take a serious wound to the shoulder. Eventually emerging victorious, Alexander had all the men executed and sold the women and children into slavery. Alexander began to be seen as a liberator in Egypt and was pronounced the son of a deity. This further bolstered rumours that Alexander was really the son of Zeus. In Egypt, Alexander went on to found Alexandria, a city which still stands to this day. The final battle between Darius and Alexander occurred in what is now northern Iran at the Battle of Gargamella. This decisive victory saw Alexander seize the city of Babylon, whilst Darius fled with a few trusted generals into the mountains. Alexander knew that, as long as Darius lived, his claim to the Persian Empire was threatened. As he finally closed in, Darius was betrayed and murdered by his own men. Finding Darius's corpse, Alexander gave the fallen king a royal burial and, after following the king's assassins over the Hindu Kush mountains, had the betrayers tortured and executed. Alexander's rule over Persia was complete, and, at the age of 26, Alexander had conquered the largest empire the world had ever seen. Shortly afterwards, Alexander married his first wife, a Persian princess from Bactria named Roxana. Turning his gaze upon India, Alexander offered peace towards the chieftains there who would submit to his rule, but destroyed those who resisted. The fighting was hard, and during an assault against the Assakenoi, who fought in the strongholds of Massaja, Alexander took a serious wound to the ankle. Once his forces finally prevailed, Alexander had the entire population of Massaja slaughtered and reduced the buildings to rubble. Alexander later went to battle against the mighty King Porus at the Battle of Hydaspes, whose forces included around 100 war elephants. Though Alexander's forces were victorious, it was one of Alexander's bloodiest battles, with his forces outnumbered some 3-1. Alexander was so impressed by King Porus's skill that he allowed him to keep his kingship under Greek rule. Porus is considered the most successful opponent of Alexander. It was shortly after this battle that Alexander's horse Bucephalus died, prompting Alexander to found a city in his honour called Alexandria Bucephalus. Following their narrow and bloody victory, Alexander's forces were running low on morale. Afraid at the prospect of encountering another army like Porus's, and tired from years of fighting and campaigning, Alexander's forces mutinied near the Ganges River and refused to march further east. Alexander was forced to secede and his army turned south. Whilst marching home, Alexander opted to personally march some of his troops through the Gedrosian desert. Though it was the most direct route to the city of Susa in Persia, many of his men died in the intense heat, and the decision is considered to be one of Alexander's few tactical blunders. In Susa, Alexander showed thanks towards his troops by paying off his soldiers' debts and announced that disabled or aging soldiers would be returned to Macedon. Misunderstanding his intentions, his troops refused to be sent away and mutinied again, also criticising their leader for introducing Persian officers into his army. After 3 days, Alexander finally calmed his troops and held a large banquet of forgiveness. In order to try and integrate the Macedonians and the Persians, Alexander held a mass marriage between his senior officers and the Persian noblewomen. Shortly afterwards, Alexander's dear friend Hephaestion died of a fever that lasted 7 days, thought to have been typhoid. His death deeply affected Alexander, who went into a state of uncontrollable grief. He remained with Hephaestion's body for days without eating or drinking, and had his doctor executed for neglect. Alexander personally drove his friend's funeral carriage back to Babylon, and Hephaestion was burned on an enormous pyre, and games were held in his honour. The festival was one of the largest the world had ever seen in terms of its cost and the number of people in attendance. Alexander then sent messengers to the oracle at Siwa to ask that Hephaestion be worshipped as a god. The oracle stated Hephaestion could not be a god, but could be worshipped as a divine hero such as Achilles, Heracles, or Odysseus. Finally, Alexander ordered that the sacred flame in the temple should be extinguished, a gesture usually reserved for the great king himself. Hephaestion's death was a major blow to Alexander, and the king would himself die the following year. Following Hephaestion's funeral, Alexander began planning an invasion of Arabia, but died before the expedition could be realised. In 232 BC, Alexander developed a fever and died in Babylon at the age of 32. The fever lasted over 10 days before Alexander finally died. It's thought that he became ill following a night of heavy drinking. It's been suggested that he was poisoned, certainly a possible theory, but the length of time between becoming ill and dying suggests it could well have been a natural cause such as malaria or typhoid. It's also worth noting that, at the age of 32, Alexander's physical wounds, heavy drinking, mental stress, and the loss of his dear friend could be cause for declining health. With no apparent heir, Alexander's generals asked the dying king who should succeed him. Alexander replied, the best. Alexander's body was placed in a sarcophagus filled with honey in order to preserve the body. Alexander's final resting place was Alexandria, where he was eventually moved to a glass sarcophagus. Historical figures are said to have visited the tomb over the years, including Julius Caesar and Augustus. The insane Roman Emperor Caligula is said to have taken Alexander's breastplate from his tomb for his own use. The tomb's history becomes hazy, and its location is now unknown. Due to there being no clear successor, Alexander's generals fought among themselves over who should rule the empire. Many of Alexander's generals, such as Ptolemy, Cassander, and Craterus, ended up going to war against one another. Alexander's first wife, Roxana, was pregnant with his child when he died, and she had a son named Alexander IV. The two, along with Alexander's mother, Olympias, were poisoned by Cassander. Alexander's personality was greatly influenced by both his parents. His mother believed he was destined for greatness and instilled in him a feeling of destiny. From a young age, Alexander saw his father win victory after victory, never tiring or acknowledging severe wounds. This brought out a competitive streak in Alexander, and the young prince felt the need to achieve his own greatness in order to step out of his father's shadow. He is said to have once voiced concern that his father would leave him no great or brilliant achievement to be displayed to the world. Alexander was known for being perceptive, logical, and calculating. He had a great desire for knowledge, a love of philosophy, and was an avid reader, traits which no doubt helped him be the successful commander he was. He was a patron of both the arts and sciences, but was supposedly uninterested in sports or even the Olympic Games. He was also known for having great charisma, a skill which shows given the fact his army only rebelled twice despite the intense campaigns. Alexander also showed an interest in foreign cultures and appeared to have a desire to see East and West integrate. He adopted many Persian customs and styles, a habit which was not always welcomed by his Greek generals. The mercy and respect he showed towards those who submitted to his rule could be considered quite progressive, especially when compared to conquerors who came both before and after him. However, Alexander did have his fair share of flaws. As a younger man, Alexander seemed to avoid drinking to excess after seeing how it made his father. As he grew older, he too began to drink and was prone to violent outbursts and impulsive decisions. One particular incident occurred when he and a general named Clytus the Black began drunkenly arguing. In a fit of fury, Alexander speared Clytus through the heart with a javelin. Alexander was apparently horrified at this violent outburst and showed genuine remorse for his actions. The incident was made all the worse by the fact Clytus had personally saved Alexander's life in battle. In his later years, Alexander appears to have shown signs of megalomania and paranoia. The greater his achievements, the more his ambition grew. His mother had told him as a child he was the son of Zeus, and Alexander was happy for rumours of his divinity to spread. The loss of Hephaestion has often been cited as a reason for Alexander's deteriorating mental state, as he may well have been one of the few people with whom Alexander could speak honestly and hear the truth in return. Alexander's sexuality is often debated. While there is no real evidence to suggest he did engage in homosexual relationships, such a thing was accepted in Greek society and would not have been controversial. Alexander's legacy is one that has lasted for thousands of years and made him one of the most iconic historical figures of all time. His skill in warfare as a soldier and a general has inspired many historic leaders over history, and his tactics are still studied today. His empire connected East and West and spread Greek culture throughout Asia. His immortality is matched by few other historical figures, and his actions echo through time even today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. Feel free to leave a comment as to which historical figure I should tackle next. I'm very new to video editing, so I apologise if this video seems a little rough around the edges. Hopefully the quality will improve as I make more. See you next time, and remember, if history has taught us one thing, it's never invade Russia in the winter.